The janitor walked quietly through the wide, polished hallways of the corporate building. His shoes made soft sounds on the shiny marble floors, barely noticeable amid the hum of computers and the chatter of employees. Nobody paid him much attention. Most of the people here saw him only as the man who mopped floors and emptied trash cans. He didn't mind. He had long learned that people's judgments were often shallow, and he preferred to work silently, unnoticed, yet aware of everything that happened around him. He was an older man, with silver-streaked hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything. There was a strange mix of gentleness and sharpness in his gaze. He could watch a room full of people and notice details that nobody else could, how a certain executive fiddled nervously with his pen, how a small leak in the ceiling dripped silently onto the corner of the carpet, or how the office printer jammed every time someone tried to print something important. He moved methodically, checking every floor, fixing little problems quietly, always making sure that the office ran smoothly even when the people in it never realized it. Today was different. There was a tension in the air that even the janitor could sense. The company was holding its quarterly board meeting tomorrow, and everyone was busy preparing. Executives walked around in sharp suits, talking in hurried voices, their faces tight with stress. They were worried about profits, deadlines, and appearances, but they never noticed the janitor who quietly observed everything. He knew the building like the back of his hand. He had seen the cracks in their plans, the mistakes in their spreadsheets, the hidden chaos behind the glossy reports. And he had been taking notes, quietly, for months. As he pushed the cleaning cart down the hall, he overheard snippets of conversation. "We need to impress the board tomorrow. Nothing can go wrong," one executive said. Another laughed nervously. "Don't worry. Everyone knows who's really in charge here." They spoke about power and money, but the janitor only smiled faintly. They did not see the world as he did. They did not notice the small, important details that often determined whether a company thrived or failed. They thought of him as invisible, as someone who cleaned floors and nothing else. That made his knowledge all the more powerful. He entered the main office area where the lights reflected off the windows, and the city skyline glowed outside. People were rushing in every direction, carrying papers and laptops, checking emails and phones. The janitor moved past them silently, emptying trash bins, straightening chairs, wiping smudges off glass doors. He noticed the tense energy, the hurried movements, and the subtle mistakes that the busy employees didn't even realize they were making. A document left on the floor contained numbers that didn't add up. A filing cabinet was out of order, hiding important contracts. The janitor made a mental note of everything, storing it in his sharp mind for a moment that had not yet arrived. In the break room, he paused for a moment to make coffee. The aroma was comforting, a small personal ritual that reminded him of his quiet life outside this bustling corporate world. He watched employees pass by, laughing and talking about the upcoming board meeting. One young intern sneered quietly, "Why is the janitor even here during all this planning? He should be cleaning, not watching us." The janitor didn't react. He had learned long ago that people often underestimated others. That was their mistake, and one day, it would become very clear. As the day wore on, he went about his work with precision. He cleaned, fixed, observed, and recorded. He noticed the executive in charge of finance rushing through a report, barely reading it before signing. He noticed the marketing head leaving sensitive emails on the printer, unprotected and careless. Each mistake seemed small, almost trivial, but together they created a pattern of risk that the janitor understood fully. The company was walking toward disaster, and most of the people in the building didn't even realize it. The janitor felt a quiet determination. He knew he could not speak out yet. Timing was everything. He had to wait for the perfect moment, when the boardroom would be full, the executives proud and careless, and everyone would be paying attention. That was when he would act. He passed by the elevators and saw a group of employees laughing about him. "There goes the janitor again, pretending he belongs here," one said. Another laughed, "I wonder if he even knows what's happening in this building." The janitor simply smiled faintly, pushing his cart forward. They didn't know that he had seen everything. They didn't know that he had quietly studied their habits, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the vulnerabilities of the company. He carried no resentment, only patience. And patience, he knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. Later, in the dim light of the late afternoon, the janitor went to the boardroom. He was not supposed to be there, but he had learned every schedule, every keycard access, every hidden corner of the building. He cleaned the room quietly, making sure the table was spotless, the chairs aligned, the projector working. He placed a fresh pitcher of water on the table, adjusted the lights to avoid glare, and made subtle notes in his small notebook. Every detail mattered. Every small improvement was a part of a larger plan he had been forming for months. As he worked, he remembered the first day he had started at the company. He had been nervous and shy, worried about being noticed. But over time, he had discovered that knowledge and observation were more powerful than titles and suits. While the executives chased appearances, he chased reality. While they focused on impressing others, he focused on understanding the truth. And now, he had the truth in his hands, carefully documented, ready for the right moment. Night fell, and the building emptied. The janitor stayed behind, finishing his rounds, quietly moving from floor to floor. He made sure the lights were off where needed, computers were safely shut down, and everything was in order. But even in this quiet hour, his mind was working, analyzing, planning. He knew that tomorrow would be the day when his knowledge mattered most. He knew that the executives would walk into the boardroom with arrogance and pride, laughing at him, mocking him. But they didn't understand that the quiet janitor had seen more than they ever would. He had prepared. He had waited. And when the moment came, the entire company would see him not as a cleaner, but as a force that could not be ignored. Before leaving for the night, he paused at the window overlooking the city. The lights of the skyscrapers glittered like stars, and the streets were quiet. He felt a calm sense of purpose. Tomorrow, he would walk into the boardroom not with anger, not with boasting, but with knowledge, proof, and quiet confidence. And the executives, who laughed at his humble uniform and gentle smile, would finally realize that underestimating him had been their biggest mistake. As he pushed his cart to the elevator, the janitor thought of the hours of preparation, the careful notes, the observations, and the small details that had gone unnoticed by everyone else. He felt no fear, only readiness. Tomorrow, he would step into the room where power and arrogance had blinded the executives to the truth. Tomorrow, he would show them what humility, patience, and quiet intelligence could do. And tonight, in the silence of the empty building, he allowed himself a faint, knowing smile. Morning sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the corporate tower, reflecting across the spotless floors the janitor had polished the night before. The building buzzed with tension. It was the day of the big board meeting, the one everyone had been preparing for all week. Executives rushed through the hallways, clutching laptops and files, fixing their ties and makeup in the mirrored walls. Voices echoed, sharp with stress and competition. The janitor arrived quietly, just as he always did. Dressed in his clean blue uniform, he carried his cart filled with simple tools, a mop, a broom, and a small notebook tucked neatly under a cleaning cloth. He greeted the receptionist with a calm smile, but she didn't even glance at him. To her, he was invisible. Just another part of the background. But today, the janitor's eyes were different. Behind that calm, humble expression was focus, a quiet determination. He knew today was important, not just for the company, but for him. It was the day his months of silent observation would start to matter. In the large meeting room upstairs, the executives were already gathering. Expensive suits, high heels, expensive watches, the smell of perfume and coffee mixed with the pressure of performance. Everyone wanted to impress the board members who were coming in. Nobody wanted to look weak. And nobody, absolutely nobody, was thinking about the old janitor downstairs. As he cleaned the hallway outside the meeting room, he could hear their laughter through the glass walls. They were mocking someone, and he knew exactly who. "Did you see him yesterday?" one executive sneered. "Still walking around like he owns the place." A woman giggled. Oh, you mean our wise old janitor? Maybe he'll give us some business advice today. The others laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that's meant to hurt. The janitor didn't react. He just moved his mop slowly across the floor, his face calm. But inside, he felt something stir, not anger, but resolve. He had seen these same people make decisions that affected hundreds of employees. He had watched them ignore warnings, cover mistakes, and waste resources. He had seen hardworking people lose their jobs because of careless leadership. And every night, when everyone went home, he quietly gathered the evidence that would one day show the truth. As he worked, a young intern passed by, holding a stack of papers. She looked nervous, her hands shaking. The janitor noticed immediately. "Big day?" he asked gently. She nodded quickly. "Yes. I have to deliver these reports for the meeting. I just hope nothing goes wrong." He smiled kindly. "You'll do fine. Just stay calm. People make better choices when they're not afraid." The girl smiled a little and hurried away. Moments like this reminded him why he cared. Behind the shiny walls and fake smiles, there were good people, workers who were trying their best, often ignored or mistreated by the people on top. That was what drove him. He wasn't seeking revenge. He wanted justice, quiet and fair. Upstairs, the executives gathered around the long table. Their conversation grew louder. They spoke of numbers and profits, of shareholders and power. The janitor could hear bits and pieces as he continued cleaning nearby. "We can't let the board see those missing reports," one said. "Don't worry," another replied, "I already deleted those files. Nobody will find them." The janitor's eyes flickered slightly. He had already made copies of those very files weeks ago. He moved silently, pushing his cart closer to the door. Through the glass, he could see their confident faces, the CEO at the head of the table, the finance director flipping through spreadsheets, the operations manager whispering behind her hand. They looked powerful, but the janitor saw something deeper, fear hiding behind their pride. They were terrified of exposure. As he turned to leave, the CEO stepped out for a call. The janitor nodded politely. "Morning, sir." The CEO barely looked at him. "Morning, you. Be careful around the boardroom. We have an important meeting." "Yes, sir," the janitor replied softly. "I'll make sure everything's clean before they arrive." When the CEO walked away, the janitor slipped a small note under the projector screen, just a simple reminder that said, "Truth has a way of shining through dust." Then he continued cleaning as if nothing happened. Hours passed. The clock ticked closer to the meeting time. The board members were expected soon. Everyone was on edge. Coffee cups rattled, printers jammed, assistants rushed around carrying papers and bottled water. In the middle of the chaos, a group of employees gathered near the elevator, whispering and laughing again. "I heard the janitor keeps some kind of notebook," one said. "What's he writing in it?" "Cleaning tips," another joked. "Probably counting how many trash cans he empties." They laughed loudly. But this time, the janitor's calm smile didn't fade. He just kept walking. That notebook they mocked contained everything they didn't want anyone to know: expense manipulations, secret conversations, forged reports. He had spent months collecting it all, waiting for the moment when it would truly matter. By late morning, the building grew quieter. The janitor made his way to the lower storage room where his cleaning supplies were kept. He placed the notebook gently on the shelf, staring at it for a long moment. He thought about everything that had led him here, the years of silent work, the countless times people had ignored or insulted him, the nights he had stayed late fixing the problems others caused. He thought of the people who had been fired unfairly, the workers whose pay had been cut, the honest voices silenced by arrogance. Today, he told himself, something would change. As he stepped out of the storage room, he saw the young intern again. She looked even more nervous now, holding a folder close to her chest. They're asking for the updated numbers, she said quietly. But something's wrong. The totals don't match. I don't understand what happened. The janitor looked at her kindly. Sometimes, people change numbers to hide the truth, he said softly. Don't worry. The truth doesn't stay hidden forever. The intern frowned, confused, but she nodded and hurried away. Back upstairs, the executives gathered again, rehearsing their presentations. The CFO was pacing, his face pale. The marketing director was whispering frantically to the CEO. Something was clearly wrong. Files had gone missing, and some numbers didn't match the earlier reports. Panic spread like fire. Who has access to these files? The CEO demanded. Just us, the CFO replied quickly. And maybe the IT department. Then find out what happened, the CEO barked. The janitor watched from a distance, quietly sweeping the floor. His movements were calm, deliberate. He could hear their frustration growing by the minute. They were starting to lose control, and he knew it. He didn't need to expose them yet, they were exposing themselves. One of the executives turned toward him suddenly. Hey, old man. You missed a spot, he shouted sarcastically. The others laughed. The janitor looked up and nodded. Of course, sir. I'll clean every mess I see. The man smirked, not realizing the double meaning behind the janitor's words. The laughter faded as the clock struck 10. The board members had arrived. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly, stiff, polite smiles replaced the arrogance. The janitor quietly finished wiping the floor near the door, but before leaving, he looked up at the people inside. His eyes met the CEO's for just a moment. Calm. Steady. Almost knowing. The CEO frowned slightly, feeling a strange unease he couldn't explain. For a second, he wondered if the janitor knew something. But then he shook it off and focused on his presentation. As the janitor walked away, he whispered under his breath, "The floor is clean. But soon, the truth will be, too." He went downstairs to the maintenance room again, sat on an old wooden stool, and opened his notebook. Each page was filled with neat handwriting, notes, times, copies of conversations, even photographs. Every detail was organized like a puzzle that was finally complete. The janitor turned to the last page, where a single sentence was written in bold letters. When the powerful forget humility, truth becomes the loudest voice in the room. He closed the notebook gently and took a deep breath. The time was near. The board meeting would soon begin. The people upstairs thought they were safe behind their titles, their money, their laughter. But they had no idea that the quiet janitor, the man they ignored every day, held in his hands the one thing none of them could control, the truth. And tomorrow, that truth would echo in the boardroom loud enough to silence every arrogant voice in it. The morning of the board meeting arrived with heavy tension. The sky outside was gray, and the clouds hung low over the city as if they, too, sensed that something big was about to happen. Inside the building, everything was in motion: suits, papers, laptops, nervous chatter. The boardroom on the top floor was spotless, shining like a mirror. The janitor had made sure of that. But as he stood quietly in the hallway outside, watching the executives hurry past him, he could feel the storm building, not outside, but inside the hearts of the people who thought they ruled this place. The board members had begun to arrive, older men and women in expensive clothes, shaking hands, smiling politely, pretending that everything was under control. The CEO stood at the door, greeting them with his practiced smile. The janitor moved silently near the corner, pretending to wipe the glass wall, but his sharp eyes noticed every detail. He saw the CFO whisper nervously to the CEO. He saw the operations head scrolling through her phone, her hands trembling slightly. He saw the young intern standing outside the room, clutching a file, unsure whether to go in or not. She looked scared. Something inside the janitor stirred, a quiet sympathy. He had been watching this company long enough to know that when fear spreads among the innocent, it means the powerful are hiding something. The janitor stepped closer to the boardroom door, his cleaning cart squeaking slightly. One of the executives noticed and frowned. "Hey!" "Not now," the man snapped. "Can't you see we're about to start a meeting? Take that thing somewhere else." The janitor nodded politely. "Of course, sir. Just finishing up." But instead of leaving, he slowly began to wipe the glass wall right beside the boardroom, a perfect spot from which he could see and hear everything inside. The meeting began. The CEO stood tall, full of confidence that looked more like arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "thank you for joining us today. Our company has faced challenges, but we've managed to stay strong. And this quarter, we're ready to present our success." He clicked the remote, and a presentation flashed on the big screen. Charts, profits, graphs, everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The janitor, still cleaning quietly outside, knew those numbers weren't real. He had seen the missing reports, the fake signatures, the altered totals. He had seen the truth beneath the shine. The CFO spoke next, his voice shaking slightly. "As you can see, our revenue has increased by 8%. Our expenses are under control. We've streamlined operations." But before he could finish, one of the board members interrupted. "Excuse me, but some of these numbers don't match the previous quarter's data." A small silence filled the room. The CFO blinked. That's because there was an adjustment made after audit review." "Adjustment?" the board member repeated. "Then why wasn't it documented?" The CEO quickly stepped in, smiling. "Minor technical issue. We'll fix that later. Let's move on." The janitor stopped wiping the glass for a moment. The first crack had appeared. The truth was trying to surface. Inside, the tension grew thicker. The intern, still holding her file, hesitated before stepping inside. Her face was pale. "Sir," she said softly, "these are the reports you asked for." The CEO turned sharply. "Not now. Leave them there and go." She placed the file on the table and hurried out. As she passed the janitor, she whispered, "They're scared." He gave her a calm nod. "Don't be. The truth always finds a way." The janitor continued cleaning, slowly moving closer to the boardroom door. He could see the faces inside more clearly now, the sweat on the CFO's forehead, the twitching of the CEO's jaw, the nervous tapping of pens. The board members were beginning to ask questions that didn't have simple answers. Finally, one of them spoke bluntly. "These projections don't make sense. It feels like someone is hiding losses." Another added, "I want to see the real numbers, not edited ones." The CEO forced a smile. "Of course. We'll send you the detailed breakdown later." But before he could continue, the janitor did something nobody expected. He knocked softly on the glass wall. Everyone inside turned to look. The room went silent. For a long second, nobody said a word. Then the CEO frowned. "What is it now?" The janitor opened the door slightly, his expression calm and polite. "Excuse me, sir. I just wanted to check if I can clean the air vent now or later. It's making noise that might disturb your meeting." There was a small ripple of laughter from some executives, relieved to have a moment of distraction. Later, the CEO said sharply, "We're in the middle of something important." "Of course," the janitor said, his eyes gentle. "I understand. But sometimes a small thing, like dust in a vent, can cause big problems later." The CEO rolled his eyes. "We'll take that risk, thank you." The janitor nodded, stepping back. But his words lingered in the room like smoke, subtle, meaningful, and unsettling. The meeting resumed, but now the atmosphere had changed. The board members looked more alert. Some glanced toward the janitor through the glass, as if his simple comment had touched something inside them. A few minutes later, the CFO's laptop froze. The screen went black. Panic flickered in his eyes. "What's happening?" the CEO hissed. I don't know. The file isn't opening." Another executive leaned over to help, but the screen flashed a message: corrupt data file, missing records. The room froze. The janitor, standing quietly outside, watched through the glass. He didn't move, didn't speak. But there was a knowing calm in his eyes, as if he had expected this. The CEO's voice rose. "Fix it. We can't waste time." But nothing worked. The data was gone. And worse, the board members had noticed. One of them leaned forward. "You said everything was under control, yet your main file is corrupted. How can we trust these numbers?" The CFO's face turned pale. "It must be a system error." The board member cut him off. "Or someone tampered with the reports." The CEO looked furious now, his control slipping. He stood up sharply. "We'll handle this internally." Meeting dismissed for 5 minutes. As everyone began whispering and moving, the janitor slowly pushed open the door again. "Sorry, sir," he said softly. "Should I clean the room now?" The CEO turned toward him, anger boiling. "No! Get out." "Wait," he stopped mid-sentence, noticing something in the janitor's hands, a small notebook. "What's that?" he asked suspiciously. The janitor looked at it calmly. "Just notes, sir. About things that need fixing." The CEO narrowed his eyes. "Fixing? What do you mean?" The janitor's voice was steady. "Every night, I fix what others leave broken: leaky pipes, jammed printers, forgotten reports, small problems no one notices. But sometimes, the biggest mess isn't on the floor." The room fell silent. One of the board members looked curious. "What kind of notes?" The janitor stepped forward slowly, placing the notebook gently on the table. "The kind that might help you understand what's really happening in your company." The CFO jumped up. "This is ridiculous. He's just a janitor." The janitor looked at him kindly. "Yes. Just a janitor who's been listening for years." He opened the notebook. The first page was filled with neatly written lines, dates, transactions, conversations. Each entry told a story of carelessness, lies, and cover-ups. The CEO stared in disbelief. "How did you?" The janitor's calm eyes met his. "By cleaning up after everyone. Dirt doesn't only stay on the floor, sir." The board members leaned forward, reading the pages. Gasps filled the room. Every line revealed something: hidden losses, manipulated reports, secret deals. The truth was now on the table, literally. The CEO tried to grab the notebook, but one of the board members stopped him. "Let him speak," she said firmly. The janitor looked around the room. "You all built something great once. But pride made you blind. You stopped seeing the people who helped you, and the problems that grew under your watch. I didn't come here to destroy this company. I came to save it before it collapses under its own lies." The silence that followed was deafening. No one laughed this time. No one mocked. The janitor stood there, humble yet unshaken, his quiet voice carrying more power than any title in that room. Then he said softly, "You can clean floors all you want, but if the truth stays buried, the dirt always returns." And with that, he turned to leave the boardroom, his cart squeaking softly behind him. The executives sat frozen, their faces pale. The board members whispered urgently among themselves. The man they had mocked as invisible had just changed everything, and he hadn't even raised his voice. The silence inside the boardroom was heavy, thick with shock and disbelief. For a long moment, no one spoke. The executives sat frozen in their leather chairs, staring at the old janitor's notebook lying open on the table. The pages trembled slightly from the soft wind blowing through the air vent, the same one the janitor had mentioned earlier, the one nobody cared to fix. The CEO's jaw was tight, his pride burning behind his eyes. He finally broke the silence. "This is absurd," he snapped, his voice sharp. "This man, he's just a janitor. He doesn't know what he's talking about." But one of the board members, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, slowly raised her hand. "Then explain these notes," she said calmly. "They're detailed. Dates, names, amounts, this isn't random." The janitor stood quietly near the door, his hands folded in front of him. "I wrote them because I saw things that didn't make sense," he said softly. "Every night, I'd find shredded papers in the bins, pieces of reports that didn't match the numbers printed the next morning. I'd see new signatures appear on documents that weren't there before. I don't understand all your business words, but I know when something isn't right." The CFO jumped up, sweating. "He's lying. He must have stolen confidential data." The janitor looked at him calmly. "I didn't steal anything. You threw the truth away yourselves. I only picked it up." The room went utterly still. The CEO's voice rose again, louder, desperate. "This is ridiculous. Security, remove him." But before anyone could move, the same board member spoke again, her tone firm, authoritative. "No one leaves this room." Everyone froze. The CEO turned toward her, startled. "Excuse me?" She leaned forward, her voice cold. "If even half of what's written in this notebook is true, then your leadership is in question. And I intend to find out." The janitor didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He simply stepped closer to the table and turned another page. The neat handwriting continued, page after page of observations. "These are not accusations," he said quietly. "They're facts. I've worked here for 15 years. I've seen people come and go. I've seen employees lose their jobs because of mistakes that weren't theirs. I've watched you all make decisions that hurt good people." The board members leaned closer, reading the lines. One page described how company funds had been used for personal trips. Another listed false expense claims, mismatched records, and quiet cover-ups. The CFO's hands shook. "You don't understand how business works." The janitor interrupted gently. "Maybe not. But I do understand honesty. And I know that if you clean a room but leave dirt under the rug, it still smells bad after a while." A few of the executives lowered their eyes. The words hit harder than they expected. The CEO tried to regain control. "Do you really think anyone will believe you over us? You're nothing but a cleaner." The janitor's voice remained soft. "That's true, sir. I clean what others don't want to touch." That single sentence pierced through the room like a blade. One of the younger executives, who had mocked him earlier, whispered under his breath, "How did he even know all this?" The janitor turned toward him. "Because I was always here. When you thought no one was watching. I saw who stayed late, who left early, who whispered in corners, and who pretended everything was fine." The CEO slammed his hand on the table. "Enough." His face was red now. "You come in here with your little notebook, thinking you can embarrass me in front of the board?" The janitor met his furious gaze with calm eyes. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to remind you what you've forgotten. This company was built by people, not power." The room grew tense again. Even the air felt heavy. The board members exchanged glances, their faces thoughtful. They were starting to see what they had ignored for too long. The janitor stepped closer and turned another page. "You see this?" he said, pointing at a list of figures. "These are real numbers. The night you signed the last report, I found the original document in the trash. Someone had changed the totals before printing it." He placed a folder on the table, photocopies of the documents he had collected over months. I don't know accounting, he admitted. But when numbers change without reason, it usually means someone is hiding something. The CFO sank back into his chair, pale and silent. The CEO tried to smile again, but it looked forced. So what are you trying to do? Get me fired? Take over my job? The janitor shook his head. No, sir. I don't want your job. I just want this company to be clean, truly clean. There was a long pause. The board members whispered among themselves. Finally, one of them turned to the janitor. Why didn't you come forward earlier? The janitor looked down for a moment, his voice thoughtful. Because people don't listen to cleaners. They only notice us when the floor is dirty. I waited because I wanted proof that couldn't be ignored. I knew one day, the truth would matter. He looked up again, his eyes calm but firm. And that day is today. Outside the window, the storm clouds were gathering again, the sky darkening. It was as if nature itself reflected the chaos inside the room. The CEO tried one last time to save face. This is all nonsense. He's twisting things. You think a janitor can run this company better than me? The janitor didn't answer right away. He walked slowly to the end of the long table, his steps steady. Then he looked at the CEO and said quietly, I think anyone who respects people, listens to truth, and admits mistakes can run anything better than someone who doesn't. No one laughed. The board members' expressions had changed completely. They no longer saw a janitor. They saw a man who had courage and truth. The gray-haired woman spoke again. We'll need to review all these records. Effective immediately, I'm suspending all major decisions until an internal investigation is completed. The CEO's face turned white. You can't do that. I just did, she said coldly. The janitor stepped back, silent. He had said what needed to be said. His work here, in a way, was done. But before leaving, he turned to the room once more. When I first came here, this building was full of life, he said softly. People cared about their work, about each other. Then, slowly, greed took over. I watched it spread like dust, quiet, invisible, but everywhere. I kept cleaning, but the real dirt was not on the floor. It was in hearts that stopped caring. He looked at the board members. You can fix this company. But only if you remember that respect builds more than money ever will. A silence followed, deep, thoughtful. The janitor picked up his cart and began to walk toward the door. His hands were steady, his face calm. He didn't need applause. He didn't need thanks. The truth was enough. But before he stepped out, the gray-haired board member said, Wait. He turned slightly. She looked at him, her expression softening. You've done something brave today. People like you keep this place standing. Don't ever think you're invisible. The janitor gave a gentle nod. Thank you, ma'am. But I was never invisible. People just stopped looking. With that, he left the boardroom. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Inside, the executives sat speechless. The CEO leaned back in his chair, breathing hard, his empire beginning to crack. The board members started going through the notebook again, whispering in low voices. And down the hallway, the janitor walked slowly, his footsteps soft but sure. He passed by the young intern, who looked up at him with wide eyes. What happened? She asked. He smiled kindly. The truth came out, he said. It always does. The intern smiled back, relief filling her face. As he continued down the corridor, he looked through the glass walls of the building. The storm outside had begun, raindrops tapping against the windows, washing the dust away. He whispered quietly to himself, It's time for everything to be clean again. And somewhere deep inside the boardroom, for the first time in years, the people who thought they knew everything finally began to see the truth, all because of the quiet janitor they never respected, the one who dared to make them listen. The morning after the storm, the entire building felt different. The golden letters of the company's name on the front door still shone brightly, but inside, the atmosphere was cold, uncertain, and full of whispers. The executives arrived one by one, their usual confidence gone. The gray-haired board member, Mrs. Reynolds, had ordered an emergency internal review. Files were being checked, emails searched, and numbers compared. For the first time, the powerful men and women who once laughed at the janitor were afraid. Down in the basement, the old janitor quietly returned to his work. He was sweeping the hallway near the elevator when he heard two employees talking in hushed voices. "Did you hear? They suspended the CEO." "No way." "Seriously?" "Yes. And the CFO too. They said something about false accounts and misused funds." The janitor didn't look up. He just kept sweeping, slow and calm, like he always did. But deep inside, he felt something shift, not joy, not revenge, just quiet justice. Upstairs, chaos ruled the boardroom. The remaining executives argued over who would take control, who was to blame, and what to do next. The company's reputation was on the edge. Investors were panicking, employees were scared, and rumors were spreading like wildfire. Mrs. Reynolds sat at the head of the table, tapping her pen softly. "We need to act fast," she said firmly. "We must save what's left before it's too late." One of the younger executives, nervous and pale, spoke up. "But how? The systems are broken. The people don't trust management anymore." There was a long pause before she said, "Then maybe it's time we ask someone who actually knows how this company works." The others frowned in confusion. "Who?" Her answer was simple. "The janitor." The room fell silent. "You can't be serious," one of the directors said. "He's not trained for business." Mrs. Reynolds' eyes were sharp. "Maybe not. But he's the only one who's been watching everything for years, not from the top, but from the ground." No one spoke. Finally, one executive muttered, "We've tried everything else." Maybe she's right." An hour later, the janitor was called upstairs. He entered quietly, pushing his cleaning cart as usual. "You wanted me, ma'am?" he asked, looking at Mrs. Reynolds. She smiled faintly. "Yes, Mr. Harris." "Please, have a seat." He hesitated, then slowly sat down. Around the table, the same people who once mocked him now looked uneasy, avoiding his eyes. Mrs. Reynolds spoke gently. "You've seen this company for a long time. You know its people, its flaws, its secrets. Tell us, how do we fix this?" The janitor looked down for a moment, thinking. "Fixing a company is like cleaning a floor," he said softly. "You can't just wipe the top. You need to remove what's stuck underneath, the old stains no one wanted to see." A few of the executives glanced at each other. He continued, "Start with honesty. Tell the workers the truth. Don't hide what happened. People forgive mistakes, but they don't forgive lies." Mrs. Reynolds nodded slowly. "And after that?" "Then listen to the people who actually keep this place running, the workers, the assistants, the ones who see the problems before they become disasters. You'll find your answers there." For a moment, no one spoke. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of wisdom. Mrs. Reynolds looked thoughtful. "Would you be willing to help us rebuild? At least for a short time?" The janitor smiled faintly. "I can't promise I know everything, ma'am. But I can promise to keep it clean, inside and out." And so, for the first time in the company's history, the janitor was invited to sit in meetings, not as a cleaner, but as an advisor. At first, people didn't know what to make of it. Some whispered behind his back. Others respected him silently. But little by little, his quiet honesty began to change the tone of the room. When people argued, he listened. When they lied, he asked simple questions that made the truth hard to hide. Within weeks, the tension started to ease. The employees began to smile again. The janitor often walked through the halls, talking kindly to the staff, asking about their families, listening to their worries. His presence made them feel heard, something they hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds called him into her office. "You've done more in 3 weeks than our last CEO did in 3 years, she said, smiling. He chuckled softly. "I didn't do much, ma'am. I just reminded people that this place belongs to everyone, not just those in suits." She leaned forward, her voice warm. "Still, what you've done matters. You've brought back trust." He looked out the window at the city skyline. "Trust is like glass," he said quietly. "Once it cracks, you can't hide the lines. But if you handle it with care, it still shines." That night, as he walked home through the quiet streets, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered. He thought about the company, about how close it came to collapsing, and how strange it felt to be part of saving it. He didn't see himself as a hero. He just did what he always believed in, doing what's right, no matter how small the act seemed. But not everyone was happy. Deep in another office, the former CEO sat alone, watching the news on a muted television. His empire, the one he built through pride and control, was gone. Replaced by a new system that valued honesty over fear. He slammed his glass down on the desk. "A janitor," he hissed. "They let a janitor fix everything?" He picked up the phone. "This isn't over," he whispered. Back at the company, the janitor had no idea what was coming. He only knew that for the first time in years, things were looking brighter. Employees started greeting him by name. Some even brought him coffee in the mornings. A young intern told him, "You changed everything here." People believe again. He smiled kindly. "No, dear. People just remembered who they were." But that night, as he finished his shift and turned off the lights in the main hall, he noticed something strange. The office door to the old CEO's private room was slightly open. Inside, the computer screen flickered on, showing an email being sent out. He frowned, stepping closer. On the screen, the subject line read, "Urgent, take it all back." He didn't understand it fully, but something about it felt wrong. He stood there for a moment, staring at the glowing screen. Then he whispered to himself, "Maybe the dirt isn't gone yet." He turned off the monitor, locked the door, and walked away, his shadow long across the empty hall. Outside, thunder rumbled again in the distance. The storm wasn't over. The next morning, the sky was gray again. It wasn't raining yet, but the air felt heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. Inside the company building, things seemed calm. The workers moved quietly through the halls, trying to rebuild what was broken. The janitor, Mr. Harris, walked his usual route with his cart, greeting everyone with a gentle smile. But deep down, he felt something was wrong. He couldn't forget the email he saw on the CEO's old computer, "Take it all back." The words echoed in his mind all night. Who was it sent to? What did it mean? Later that day, he passed by Mrs. Reynolds' office. She was on a call, her tone sharp but calm. "We'll handle this internally. No need to alert the media yet," she said before hanging up. When she noticed the janitor, she smiled kindly. "Good morning, Mr. Harris." He nodded. "Morning, ma'am. Everything all right?" Her smile faded slightly. "We're not sure yet. Some new financial issues just appeared, again. Old accounts, strange transfers." His heart sank. The dirt he thought was cleaned was finding its way back. That afternoon, he went to the records room. He knew the space well, he'd cleaned it for years. Boxes of papers, computer drives, old contracts, all stored there. He began to check quietly, looking for clues. As he searched, a young intern named Lisa came in. "Mr. Harris? What are you doing here?" He smiled softly. "Just making sure everything's tidy." She laughed. "You always are." But then she frowned. "You know, I saw something weird too. Someone tried to access the old CEO's email account last night." He looked up sharply. "From where?" "Remote login." "External source," she replied. "IT flagged it, but no one's figured out who." Mr. Harris thought for a long moment. The former CEO must have been trying to sabotage the company from outside. But why? That evening, a strange email went out to all investors, claiming that the company was under new corrupt leadership, that the board was hiding financial crimes, and that Mrs. Reynolds was part of it. Panic spread fast. Phones started ringing. News agencies began calling. The stock price began to drop. By morning, the company was in chaos again. Mrs. Reynolds slammed a folder onto the table in frustration. This was a planned attack. Someone is trying to destroy us from the outside. The other executives argued loudly, fear in their voices. But the janitor sat quietly in a corner, just listening. His calmness drew everyone's eyes. Finally, Mrs. Reynolds sighed. "Mr. Harris, what do we do?" He looked up, his face thoughtful. "When someone throws mud at you, you can't throw it back. You just stand still and let it dry, because the truth always shows through in the end." "But if we do nothing, we'll lose everything," one man said bitterly. The janitor nodded slowly. "Then don't do nothing. Do the right thing. Be transparent. Show the world you have nothing to hide." His voice was quiet, but steady. It carried strength without shouting. Everyone in the room went silent. Mrs. Reynolds looked at him with admiration. "He's right," she said finally. "We'll call a press conference today. We'll show every document, every record, and every change we've made since the investigation. Let the truth speak." And that's exactly what they did. That afternoon, under flashing cameras and blinding lights, Mrs. Reynolds stood before reporters and told everything: how the former management failed, how the janitor exposed the truth, and how the company was rebuilding through honesty. The crowd listened, skeptical at first, but slowly, they began to believe. When she mentioned Mr. Harris's name, the room stirred. Cameras turned toward him as he stood at the side of the stage, shy and quiet. Someone asked, "Sir, how does it feel to be the man who saved the company?" He smiled gently. "I didn't save anything," he said softly. "I just cleaned what needed to be cleaned." The reporters laughed lightly, charmed by his humility. But somewhere, far away, the old CEO watched the live broadcast on a hotel TV. His face twisted with anger. "You think you can erase me with a janitor's story?" he muttered. He picked up his phone and made another call. "It's time to make them pay." That night, strange things began happening again. Company computers started failing. Files disappeared. Important data was erased. It wasn't random, it was targeted. Mrs. Reynolds called an emergency meeting. "Someone's hacking into our system," she said, panic rising. "They're trying to wipe all our progress." The IT team worked nonstop, but the attacks were fast, clever, and brutal. In the middle of the chaos, Mr. Harris walked into the control room. "Can you trace where it's coming from?" he asked calmly. "Barely," said one technician. "They're using old access codes, ones only the former CEO and CFO had." Mr. Harris nodded slowly. Then he remembered something, a dusty, forgotten server room in the basement. He used to clean it years ago, but no one went there anymore. He quietly left the room and went downstairs. The basement was dark and quiet. The old lights flickered weakly as he walked in. He could hear the faint hum of computers still running. He found the old server, still connected, still alive. Someone was using it as a backdoor into the system. He pulled out his phone and called upstairs. "I found it," he said simply. "Shut down all external access. Now." Within seconds, the connection went dead. The hacking stopped. The screens upstairs went still. The IT team stared in disbelief. "He did it," one whispered. When Mr. Harris came back up, Mrs. Reynolds met him at the door. "How did you know where to look?" she asked, astonished. He smiled faintly. "Because I used to clean the dust off that old machine every week. Some people ignore what's under their feet. I don't." She shook her head, amazed. "You just saved us again." He looked out the window. The first light of morning was breaking through the clouds. "Not me," he said quietly. "The truth saved us. It always does." Later that day, the news reported the story, how an old janitor had stopped a cyber attack that could have destroyed the company. People everywhere began talking about him. The silent power, one newspaper called him. But fame never changed him. He still showed up early every morning, still cleaned the floors, still greeted everyone with kindness. When someone asked why he didn't retire after everything, he smiled and said, "Because as long as people are here, there will always be something worth keeping clean." And that night, as the building lights glowed peacefully again, Mrs. Reynolds stood at her window watching him mop the floors below. She whispered softly, "He doesn't just clean floors. He cleans hearts." For the first time in years, the company truly felt alive again, not because of power, not because of money, but because of one man's quiet strength. The silent power that changed everything. The building was quiet again, but this time, it was a peaceful kind of silence. The storm had finally passed, not just outside, but inside the company too. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, lighting up the boardroom where fear once ruled. The air felt lighter, cleaner, almost like the place itself was breathing again after years of suffocation. Employees walked through the halls with small smiles on their faces. For the first time in a long time, people were talking to each other, not about profits or losses, but about hope. At the far end of the hall, Mr. Harris, the janitor, pushed his cart quietly as usual. His steps were slow, calm, familiar. Everyone he passed greeted him warmly now. "Morning, Mr. Harris. Good to see you. You're a legend around here." He only smiled, nodding kindly, never letting pride touch his humble heart. Upstairs, Mrs. Reynolds stood in her office, watching the scene below. A faint smile curved her lips. She turned to her assistant. "Call everyone to the main hall. It's time." Within half an hour, the hall was full. Employees stood shoulder to shoulder, executives, interns, security guards, cleaners, everyone together. Mrs. Reynolds stepped forward. Her voice was calm but emotional. "Today, I don't want to talk about business, or profits, or recovery," she said. "I want to talk about gratitude." She turned toward the janitor standing quietly in the crowd. "This man taught us something we all forgot, that greatness doesn't come from power, but from purpose. That respect isn't earned by titles, but by actions." Everyone clapped softly, the sound spreading like a wave through the hall. Mr. Harris looked surprised, even a little uncomfortable, as all eyes turned to him. Mrs. Reynolds gestured for him to come forward. "Please, Mr. Harris," she said warmly. He slowly walked up to the stage, pushing his cap back nervously. The applause grew louder. When he reached the microphone, he looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in his gentle voice, he began to speak. "I've worked here for a long time," he said softly. "I've seen people come and go, walls painted and repainted, new faces, old dreams. But through it all, one thing never changed: this company is made of people, not just plans." He paused, letting his words sink in. We forget sometimes that everyone matters, from the person who signs the checks to the one who cleans the floors. We all build this place together. And when we start treating each other like family again, everything becomes stronger. The hall was silent, except for the sound of quiet breaths and the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, he smiled faintly. You don't need to be powerful to make a difference. You just need to care enough to do what's right, even when no one's watching. A few people wiped tears from their eyes. Mrs. Reynolds stepped forward again. Mr. Harris, she said, her voice full of emotion, on behalf of everyone here, we want to thank you. You didn't just save this company. You reminded us who we are. She handed him a small box. Inside was a gold badge with engraved letters that read, "To Mr. Samuel Harris, for keeping us honest, for keeping us whole." He stared at it quietly, his eyes glistening. I don't know what to say, he murmured. Just say you'll stay, Mrs. Reynolds replied, smiling. He chuckled softly. I was never planning to leave, ma'am. There's still plenty left to clean. The crowd laughed, their applause echoing off the high ceiling. It wasn't just clapping, it was relief, gratitude, and respect all mixed together. In that moment, everyone understood, the janitor wasn't just a worker, he was the soul of the place. Days turned into weeks. The company began to flourish again. Clients returned, employees worked harder than ever, and a new sense of honesty filled every department. Posters were hung on the walls with the words, "Integrity is our foundation." People no longer avoided the janitorial staff. They thanked them, shared lunch with them, asked their opinions. Even the media continued to cover the story. Headlines read, "The janitor who saved a Fortune 500 company. How humility changed a corporate giant." Mr. Harris became a quiet symbol of hope, not just in the company, but far beyond. Other organizations reached out to him, asking for advice, inviting him to speak. But he always said the same thing. I'm just a janitor. My advice is simple, be kind, be fair, and don't forget the people who make your world work. One evening, as he was finishing his shift, Lisa, the young intern, stopped by. Mr. Harris, can I ask you something? She said. He nodded. Of course. Why do you still clean? After everything, you could have retired. You could live comfortably now. He smiled softly. Because cleaning isn't just about floors. It's about removing what doesn't belong, lies, pride, hate. There's always something to clean somewhere. Lisa thought for a moment, then smiled. You're more than a janitor, Mr. Harris. He shook his head gently. Maybe. But that's still my favorite title. He watched her walk away, then turned off the lights one last time for the night. The building was spotless, shining like it hadn't in years. But as he walked toward the exit, he noticed one of the company plaques hanging on the wall, dusty and forgotten. He took out his cloth and wiped it clean. Underneath, the words shimmered in gold. Founded on integrity. He smiled. Now that's better, he whispered. The door closed softly behind him as he stepped into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the stars glowing faintly above. For the first time in a long time, everything felt peaceful. He took a deep breath and walked away, his reflection fading in the glass doors behind him. The humble janitor, the man who silenced the boardroom, had done more than save a company. He had reminded everyone that real power doesn't shout. It whispers. It listens. It acts. And sometimes, the ones we overlook the most are the ones who hold everything together.